The strangest thing about fate is that it never introduces itself before it changes your life. The rain started before my shift ended and showed no sign of stopping. By 10 o'clock that night, Chicago looked like a city painted in reflections. Streetlights shimmered across wet sidewalks. Headlights stretched into golden ribbons along the road. I tightened my jacket and stepped out of the diner, already thinking about the bills waiting on my kitchen table. My father needed another appointment next month. The rent was due in less than 2 weeks. And my old car had started making a noise that sounded expensive. None of those problems cared that I was exhausted. The cold wind pushed rain against my face as I hurried toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. Most people were already home. The streets felt quieter than usual. A few stores were closing. A taxi splashed through a puddle. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed briefly before disappearing. Then I noticed the argument. An older woman stood beneath the bus shelter holding a large handbag against her chest. She looked elegant despite the weather. Silver hair. Long dark coat. Straight posture. The kind of woman who carried herself with dignity no matter the circumstances. 2 younger people stood nearby. They were speaking loudly enough for everyone around them to hear. "That is our bag," one of them insisted. The woman shook her head. "No, it is not." "Then prove it." Several people waiting for the bus glanced over. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said anything. The woman looked uncomfortable but remained calm. I slowed my pace. Every sensible part of me suggested continuing home. I had enough problems already. Yet something about the look in her eyes stopped me. She seemed less angry than disappointed. Like she had expected better from the world. Before I realized what I was doing, I walked over. "Is there a problem?" The younger man turned toward me immediately. "Mind your business." I folded my arms. It became my business when you started raising your voice at a woman old enough to be your mother. The woman beside me looked surprised. The man sighed dramatically. She took the wrong bag. I glanced at the handbag. Then at the woman. "Do you have identification inside?" She nodded. Carefully, she opened the bag and removed a wallet. Her driver's license matched perfectly. The address. The name. Everything. The younger pair exchanged uncomfortable looks. One muttered an apology. A few seconds later, they walked away into the rain. Silence settled beneath the bus shelter. The older woman looked at me. Then she smiled. Warmly. Genuinely. "Thank you." I shrugged. "You should not have needed help." "Perhaps." Her voice carried quiet wisdom. But sometimes kindness arrives exactly when it is needed. The bus arrived moments later. We boarded together. During the ride, we talked about ordinary things. The weather. Chicago traffic. Her love of old books. My work at the diner. She laughed easily. Listened carefully. By the time we reached her stop, the rain had become even heavier. I insisted on walking her to her front door with my umbrella. The house surprised me. Beautiful. Large. Yet somehow understated. Before going inside, she gently squeezed my hand. Her eyes softened. "Emily," she said quietly. "You remind me of someone I lost." And for reasons I could not explain, those words stayed with me long after the door closed behind her. The next morning, I almost convinced myself the previous night had not been unusual. Chicago sunlight poured through my apartment window, turning the kitchen floor gold. My father sat at the table reading the newspaper while I prepared coffee before heading to work. Everything looked normal. Ordinary. Predictable. Yet every few minutes, I found myself thinking about the silver-haired woman and the sadness hidden behind her smile. "You seem distracted," my father said. Long shift. It was easier than explaining why a stranger had occupied my thoughts all night. The diner was busy from the moment I arrived. Coffee cups clattered. Customers filled every booth. Orders came faster than I could write them down. By noon, I had almost forgotten about the woman entirely. Then the flowers arrived. A delivery driver walked through the front door carrying an elegant arrangement of white roses and pale pink lilies. Every waitress immediately looked up. "Please tell me those are for me," Megan announced from behind the counter. The driver checked a card. "Emily Carter." My eyes widened. The entire diner erupted into teasing smiles. I accepted the flowers carefully and opened the small envelope attached to them. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. Margaret." I stared at the note for several seconds. Margaret. For the first time, I knew her name. The handwriting looked graceful and old-fashioned. Something about it made me smile. The rest of the shift passed more quickly than usual. Yet when I returned home that evening, another surprise was waiting. A small gift basket sat outside my apartment door. Inside were homemade tea biscuits, imported tea, and another handwritten note. "Thank you for walking me home in the rain. Nobody has done that for me in a very long time." My father raised an eyebrow when he saw the basket. "You have mysterious admirers now?" I laughed. "Not exactly." For the next week, Margaret and I exchanged occasional messages. Nothing dramatic. Simple conversations. She asked how my father was doing. I asked about the books she enjoyed reading. Sometimes she sent recommendations. Sometimes I sent photographs of desserts from the diner that I thought would make her laugh. The friendship felt strangely natural. Comfortable. As though we had known each other much longer than a few days. Then one afternoon, my phone rang during my lunch break. "Margaret." "Hello?" "Emily, dear, I hope I am not interrupting." Her voice sounded warm as always. "Not at all. Would you join me for tea tomorrow?" I smiled. "I would love that." The following afternoon, I arrived at her house carrying a small bakery box filled with fresh cinnamon pastries. The home looked exactly as I remembered. Beautiful but understated. Wealthy but somehow welcoming. Margaret greeted me at the door with genuine excitement. We spent nearly 2 hours drinking tea and talking about everything from family traditions to childhood memories. For the first time in months, I found myself completely relaxed. Then a distant sound interrupted our conversation. Engines. Several of them. Margaret's expression changed. Slightly. Not fear. Anticipation. Curious, I glanced toward the large front window. A line of black luxury SUVs slowly entered the long driveway. One after another. The atmosphere inside the house shifted immediately. Staff members appeared from different rooms. Security personnel moved discreetly toward the entrance. I looked at Margaret in confusion. She set down her teacup and smiled softly. "It seems my son is home." Before I could ask another question, the front door opened. And everything changed. The front door opened and every conversation inside the house seemed to pause at once. I had never seen anything like it. Men in tailored suits entered first, speaking quietly into earpieces. Not aggressively. Efficiently. Like people who were used to protecting someone important. Then he walked in. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair. Perfectly fitted charcoal coat. The kind of presence that changed a room without a single word. For a moment, I thought he looked familiar. Not because I knew him. Because he looked like the sort of man whose photograph appeared in newspapers beside stories about billion-dollar deals and powerful people. Margaret smiled immediately. Adrian. The man's expression softened the second he saw her. The transformation surprised me. The intimidating figure who had entered the house disappeared almost instantly. In his place stood a son greeting his mother. He kissed her cheek and asked about her day before he seemed to notice anyone else in the room. His eye shifted toward me. Grey. Calm. Observant. I suddenly became very aware of the pastry box sitting on my lap. "And who is this?" he asked. Margaret's smile widened. "This is Emily." Something in her tone felt deliberate. Proud, almost. "The young woman I told you about." For the first time, Adrian looked genuinely interested. "Emily Carter." I blinked. "You know my last name." He exchanged a brief glance with his mother. "I have heard quite a lot about you." My cheeks immediately warmed. Margaret looked entirely too pleased with herself. "Only good things," she added. "Mom." "What?" "It is true." I found myself laughing. To my surprise, Adrian smiled as well. The expression was brief, but unexpectedly genuine. It made him seem younger somehow. Less intimidating. We spent the next hour together in the living room. Mostly talking. Mostly listening. Margaret told embarrassing stories about Adrian's childhood. Adrian protested each one. None of them successfully. Watching them together felt strangely comforting. Despite the beautiful house and obvious wealth, they felt like a normal family. By the time I left that evening, I had almost forgotten how nervous I was when he first arrived. Almost. As I stepped onto the front porch, Adrian appeared beside me. "Emily." I turned. "Yes?" He hesitated for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "Thank you." "For what?" "For helping my mother." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. It was not a big deal. His expression suggested he disagreed. To her, it was. A cold breeze moved through the trees surrounding the property. Somewhere in the distance, city lights shimmered beyond the gates. Adrian glanced toward the driveway before looking back at me. Most people see what they can gain from others. His voice lowered slightly. "My mother says you never asked for anything." I laughed softly. That would have been a strange conversation at a bus stop. The corner of his mouth lifted again. Then he nodded once. "Good night, Emily." "Good night." The entire drive home, I kept replaying the evening in my head. Not because of the house. Not because of the luxury vehicles. Because of the way Margaret looked at her son. And the way Adrian listened when she spoke. The next morning, I arrived at the diner expecting another ordinary day. Instead, a black luxury sedan was parked across the street. And seated alone in a corner booth near the window was Adrian Moretti. Waiting. There is something unsettling about seeing a man who belongs in boardrooms sitting inside a diner with cracked vinyl booths and a coffee machine older than some of the customers. Adrian looked completely out of place. Yet somehow he also looked perfectly comfortable. I stood frozen for a second before Megan nudged my shoulder. "Table 6 is staring at you." I glanced at her. Table 6 knows my name. Her eyebrows shot upward. Then I definitely need details later. I grabbed a coffee pot and walked toward his booth. Adrian looked up from the menu as I approached. "Good morning." His voice carried the same calm confidence I remembered from the night before. "Good morning." I poured coffee into his cup. "You know there are much nicer places to eat breakfast in Chicago." A faint smile appeared. "That is what everyone keeps telling me. And yet here you are. And yet here I am." I tried not to smile back. Failed completely. Throughout the morning he remained there. Not working. Not holding meetings. Just eating breakfast and occasionally reading something on his phone. Every customer who recognized him seemed surprised. I understood why. Powerful people usually stayed hidden behind private offices and security gates. Adrian sat in a corner booth drinking coffee like everyone else. Around noon the lunch crowd slowed. I finally had a chance to sit for a few minutes. Adrian gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Join me." I am working. You are on break. I narrowed my eyes. How do you know that? Because your manager told me 5 minutes ago. I laughed despite myself and sat down. That is probably an abuse of influence. Possibly. For a moment we simply talked. About ordinary things. My father. His mother. The changing weather. The city. It felt strangely easy. Then Adrian asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Why did you stop going to college? My stomach tightened. I stared into my coffee. My mother got sick years ago. The words came quietly. Then my father needed help. Somebody had to work. Adrian listened without interrupting. Do you regret it? I thought about the question carefully. Sometimes. Honesty felt easier around him than it should have. But I do not regret helping my family. He nodded slowly. My mother would like that answer. Something warm settled between us. Not romance. Not yet. Respect. Understanding. Then his phone rang. The atmosphere changed immediately. He checked the screen and frowned. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. He answered briefly and listened for several seconds. I will handle it later. When the call ended, I pretended not to be curious. I failed at that too. Adrian noticed. You want to ask? I do not. You do. I laughed. Fine. What happened? For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Someone has been looking into people close to my family. My smile faded. Is that unusual? Very. His gaze met mine. Steady. Serious. Especially when they start asking about someone who recently became important to my mother. My pulse quickened. Before I could respond, the front door opened. An older woman entered carrying a shopping bag and looking slightly unsteady on her feet. Without thinking, I stood immediately and hurried toward her. Several customers looked away. Nobody moved. By the time I reached her side, I could already feel Adrian's eyes following me. And when I glanced back briefly, I saw something unexpected in his expression. Admiration. The older woman turned out to be perfectly fine. She had simply become dizzy after carrying too many shopping bags through the cold. I helped her sit down, brought her a glass of water, and stayed with her until the color returned to her face. She thanked me several times before leaving. To me, it felt like a normal part of the day. To Adrian, apparently, it did not. When I returned to his booth, he was still watching the front door. What? I asked as I slid back into my seat. He shook his head slowly. Nothing. That is not true. A faint smile appeared. You do that a lot. Do what? Help people before anyone asks you to. I looked around the diner. Most people would have helped. Adrian glanced toward the room. Several customers were staring at their phones. Others had barely looked up. His expression suggested he disagreed. Before I could argue further, my manager called me back to work. The afternoon rush arrived and the conversation ended. Yet Adrian's words stayed with me. Later that evening, after my shift ended, I received a message from Margaret. Tea tomorrow? I smiled immediately. Absolutely. The next afternoon, I arrived at her house carrying a small tin of homemade cookies. Margaret greeted me with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming family rather than a friend she had known. Only a few weeks. We settled into our usual seats near the sunroom windows. Outside, orange and red leaves drifted across the lawn. Inside, the scent of tea and fresh pastries filled the air. You look happier, Margaret said after studying me for a moment. I laughed softly. That is an interesting way to start a conversation. It is also true. I opened my mouth to deny it, then stopped. Because she might have been right. Life was still difficult. The bills had not disappeared. My father's health had not magically improved. Yet somehow things felt lighter lately. Margaret smiled knowingly but did not press further. Instead, she told stories about her late husband, about raising Adrian, and about the mistakes every parent makes. Hours passed without either of us noticing. Then her phone rang. She answered briefly before sighing. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing serious." Her expression said otherwise. Adrian cancelled dinner again. I frowned. Busy. Always. For a moment, sadness crossed her face. Small but unmistakable. It disappeared almost immediately. Yet I noticed. "Then we should have dinner here." She blinked. "What?" "Tonight." I stood. "You have a kitchen." "I know how to cook." Problem solved. Margaret laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. 30 minutes later, we were standing together in her kitchen preparing dinner. She chopped vegetables while I handled the rest. The entire experience felt unexpectedly natural. Comfortable. Like spending time with a favorite aunt. Just after 7 o'clock, the front door opened. We heard footsteps in the hallway. Then Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway and froze completely. His mother and I stood laughing over a cooking disaster involving too much garlic. For several seconds, he simply stared. "What happened here?" he finally asked. Margaret smiled triumphantly. "Dinner happened." Adrian looked from her to me and back again. Something softened in his expression. Something warm. Something almost grateful. Then Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder and said the one thing neither of us expected. "Emily is becoming the daughter I never had." The kitchen became completely silent. Even Margaret seemed surprised by what she had just said. Adrian looked at his mother for a moment, then at me. I felt heat rush into my face so quickly that I wanted to disappear into the pantry. "Margaret," I said, laughing nervously. "You make it sound like I moved in." "Not yet," she replied with perfect seriousness before smiling. Adrian rubbed a hand across his forehead. "I leave for one meeting and come home to find my mother adopting people." "Only the good ones," Margaret answered. Somehow that made everyone laugh. The rest of dinner passed more easily than I expected. We talked about everything and nothing. Favorite childhood meals. Holiday traditions. Terrible movies. At one point, I caught Adrian watching his mother smile at something I said. The look on his face was impossible to miss. Relief. Gratitude. As though seeing her happy mattered more than anything else in the room. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Margaret hugged me tightly at the front door. "Come back this weekend. You are very persuasive." "I know." She looked pleased with herself. Outside, cold autumn air drifted across the driveway. The night sky was clear. Stars shimmered faintly above the city lights. Before I could reach my car, Adrian appeared beside me. "I will walk you." "It is 30 feet. Then it will be a very short walk." I smiled despite myself. We crossed the driveway together in comfortable silence. For the first time since meeting him, neither of us seemed in a hurry to fill the quiet. When we reached my car, I turned toward him. "Your mother looked happy tonight." His expression softened immediately. "She was. She talks about you constantly, you know." A faint groan escaped him. "That sounds dangerous." "Very dangerous." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian glanced toward the house. Warm light glowed through the windows. His voice lowered slightly. "After my father died, she stopped inviting people into her life." I listened carefully. "Most friendships never lasted." He looked back at me. "Then she met you." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. Not because it was romantic. Because it was honest. I like her too, I admitted. Good. His smile appeared again. Small but genuine. Because she would be devastated if you disappeared. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm I never expected. Work. Home. Time with my father. And increasingly, time with Margaret. Sometimes Adrian joined us. Sometimes he did not. Yet even when he was absent, his presence seemed to linger somehow. Then one Saturday afternoon, everything shifted. Margaret and I were leaving a bookstore downtown after spending nearly 2 hours browsing old novels. She carried 3 books. I carried 6. You have a problem, she informed me. I prefer the word hobby. We were still laughing when her foot caught on an uneven section of sidewalk. The stumble lasted less than a second. I caught her arm immediately. She never fell. Yet the color drained from her face. Margaret. She tried to smile. I am fine. She was not. Within moments, I had guided her onto a nearby bench and called Adrian. 20 minutes later, a black SUV stopped beside the curb. Adrian stepped out and crossed the distance faster than I had ever seen him move. The second he reached us, his eyes went directly to his mother. Then to me. And in that moment, I realized he was not looking at the woman who needed help. He was looking at the person who had already given it. Adrian knelt beside the bench immediately. His attention never left his mother. Mom. Margaret managed a reassuring smile that fooled absolutely nobody. I am fine. That is exactly what people say when they are not fine. The relief in his voice mixed with concern in a way I had never heard before. Within minutes, a physician from a nearby clinic confirmed what I had already suspected. Exhaustion. Nothing serious. Too little rest. Too much stress. Margaret would recover perfectly with a little care and a little common sense. Neither of which she seemed interested in practicing. By the time we arrived back at her house, she was already insisting everyone was overreacting. You two are behaving as though I climbed a mountain. You carried 6 bags of books, I reminded her. That is practically the same thing. Adrian surprised me by laughing. A genuine laugh. The kind that transformed his entire face. Margaret noticed too. Her eye softened immediately. For a brief moment, she looked less relieved about her own condition than she did about seeing her son happy. That realization stayed with me long after the afternoon ended. Over the following days, I found myself spending more time at the Moretti house. Sometimes to check on Margaret. Sometimes because she invited me. Sometimes because Adrian happened to be there. One evening, I arrived to find mother and son arguing over a stack of paperwork in the library. Not angry arguing. Family arguing. You promised you would slow down. And you promised not to treat me like glass. You are impossible. You inherited that from your father. I stood in the doorway trying not to laugh. Both of them looked up simultaneously. Margaret pointed toward me. Tell him he worries too much. Adrian immediately pointed back. Tell her she ignores medical advice. I looked from one to the other. I am suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. Their laughter filled the room. Yet beneath the humor, something important was happening. I could see it. Adrian was changing. Slowly. Quietly. The walls around him were not disappearing. But they were lowering. One afternoon, I witnessed it more clearly than ever. I stopped by the house unexpectedly with homemade soup. A staff member directed me toward the garden. I found Adrian there alone. No suit jacket. No phone. No assistants. Just Adrian sitting beside a fountain reading an old photo album. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. You are hiding. Observing. That sounds like a richer version of hiding. The corner of his mouth lifted. I sat beside him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed the photographs. Family vacations. Birthdays. Holidays. Moments that looked surprisingly ordinary. You keep these? I asked. His gaze remained on the album. My mother does. He paused. I borrow them sometimes. There was something unexpectedly vulnerable about the admission. I looked at one photograph showing a much younger Adrian standing beside his parents. Everyone was smiling. You look happy. The words escaped before I could stop them. His expression changed slightly. Not sadness. Reflection. I was. Silence settled between us. Gentle. Comfortable. Then Adrian looked toward the fountain water shimmering in the afternoon sunlight. Do you know what the strangest part of all this is? What? His eyes found mine. Steady. Honest. For years I spent my life protecting my family. He glanced toward the house where Margaret rested. Then you appeared. My pulse quickened. And? Adrian smiled softly. A smile filled with something deeper than gratitude. Now every important person in my life seems happier because of you. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Adrian's words lingered in the air between us. Now every important person in my life seems happier because of you. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. Not because people were cruel. Because most people were too busy surviving their own lives to notice the effect one person had on another. I looked away first. Toward the fountain. Toward anything except the steady warmth in his eyes. You give me far too much credit. Adrian smiled faintly. My mother says the same thing. Your mother also thinks I should move into this house. That earned a genuine laugh. The sound echoed softly through the garden. Yet as the weeks passed, something began to bother me. Small things at first. Fragments of conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Security personnel appearing in places that seemed unusual. People treating Adrian with a level of caution that went beyond ordinary respect. One evening, curiosity finally got the better of me. I was helping Margaret organize books in the library when I noticed a magazine left on a nearby table. A photograph covered the front page. The man in the picture looked very familiar. My stomach tightened immediately. Adrian. He stood beside city officials and business leaders during a major charity announcement. The headline described him as one of the most influential and powerful figures in Illinois. I stared at the article. Then at the photograph. Then back at the article again. Margaret. She glanced up from her book. Yes, dear. I held up the magazine. Why does this make your son look like he owns half the city? Margaret's expression froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. The silence that followed told me everything. Oh, she said quietly. You did not know. Suddenly dozens of strange moments began connecting inside my mind. The security. The vehicles. The people who seemed nervous around him. The influence. The resources. The respect. My pulse quickened. Know what? Margaret set her book aside carefully. Emily. The front door opened before she could finish. Moments later, Adrian entered the library. One look at my face told him something was wrong. His eyes immediately shifted toward the magazine in my hands. Then he closed his eyes briefly. As though he had always known this moment would arrive. You were going to tell me? I asked. He walked into the room slowly. Yes. When? Silence. That is not an answer. Margaret quietly stood and left the room, giving us privacy. The second the door closed, the library felt enormous. How much of this is true? I asked. Adrian glanced at the magazine. Most of it. My heart sank. Why did you never say anything? His answer came immediately. Because I wanted you to know me first. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You let me think you were just a businessman. I am a businessman. Adrian. My voice cracked slightly. You know what I mean. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner seemed unusually loud. Finally, he stepped closer. Not enough to invade my space. Just enough to be heard. I did not hide because I was ashamed of who I am. His grey eyes locked onto mine. Honest. Steady. Vulnerable. I hid because I was afraid. My breath caught. Afraid of what? His voice softened. Afraid you would stop being yourself around me. And somehow, that answer hurt far more than any lie ever could. For several days after that conversation, I kept my distance. Not because I was angry. Because I needed time. Time to reconcile the man I knew with the man the rest of the city seemed to know. Yet no matter how hard I tried, one fact refused to change. Adrian was still Adrian. He was still the son who worried about his mother. The man who remembered my father's medical